Welcome to this Refugee Law Initiative conference panel session on what does international displacement mean? Opening Pandora's box. An analysis from the Latin American Network on International Displacements, LANID. Thank you so much. My name is Leticia Calderón Chelius, and I am a researcher at the Instituto Mora in Mexico. As you know, our speakers today will start presenting their key perspectives on different components of these issues, after which we will open up for broader discussion, questions and comments from you. Please typing them into the chat box of Zoom. After speakers have finished their presentation, there will be time enough for them discuss and reflect your questions and comments. So let me present our panel session that is designed to debate what in the Latin American network we are debating now about the perspectives and experiences we are following in our region. For this objective, I would like to present our panelists. And first of all, we're gonna present our first speaker, Doctora Beatriz Eugenia Sánchez-Mojica, which is the independent researcher and LANID coordinator in Colombia, but it's our general coordinator. His paper name is Control and Protect: The Tensions Within the Guiding Principles on International Displacement. Is this instrument really focused on protecting the forced to flee, or is avoiding mass exodus its main aim? This is a main discussion that we have had in our network. So please, Beatriz, can you start speaking, and then we're gonna put our comments and questions in the chat, and then we can discuss your perspective and your special points that we have had in many other debates. Please, Beatriz, go on.
Thank you, Leticia. Please give me 1 second that I'm trying to display my slides. Okay. Yeah, that would be better. Okay. Just a minute, because it seems that we have some kind of delay. And
don't
okay,
worry.
That is
okay.
Right.
Let me.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Before starting with my presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit about Latin American Network on Internal Displacement, also known as LANID, and the aim we are pursuing with this panel. As part of the INCAT project, LANID is a network that brings together an interdisciplinary group of Latin American experts on internal displacement, coming from Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. Some of us are academics, others are activists, and we even have a couple of artists among us. We have been working together for some time, debating several aspects of this kind of forced migration in our region. The first debate we held, which is still running, is about the very meaning of internal displacement and internally displaced persons as legal, political, and even sociological categories. The definition of these concepts was established in 1998 through the Guiding Principles on Forced Displacement and has been enthusiastically embraced by the international community. Indeed, most of the states that have designed public policies to address this issue have adopted some kind of version of these definitions. Latin America is not an exception. Despite their differences, the responses taken by Colombia, Peru, Honduras, El Salvador, and recently Mexico to force internal displacement share a common ground, as they are strongly influenced by the categories provided by the Guiding Principles. But these definitions have not only inspired policymakers, they have also shaped the way academics, activists, and practitioners conceive of this kind of forced migration. Nowadays, there seems to be a strong consensus that they are the most adequate tools to understand and act in response to this phenomenon. In fact, a series of scoping studies on internal displacement conducted by the INTEP project in 2020 revealed that there is no debate around these categories. Nonetheless, since the first moment that we started our conversation in LANID, we all expressed our discomfort with both definitions, as they oversimplify a phenomenon that is much more than just a question of spatial mobility. It involves the rupture of people's connection to territory, and in turn of the complex network of cultural, political, and economic relationships that sustain individuals and communities. We share the belief that the current definitions are unable to grasp this complexity, and that, in consequence, we need to think about new ways to name and manage this kind of forced migration. Now, this panel gathers some of our thoughts on this matter, and I must tell you, as this is an ongoing debate, you will find a lot of questions and just a few answers. This first paper, my paper, delves into the origins of both internal displacement and IDP categories, since they were not crafted only as devices for human rights protection. The need to control mass migration flows had a role in its inception too. The right not to be arbitrarily displaced, which constitutes a key element in both concepts as well as the central piece of the protection model proposed by the guiding principles, is the outcome of this tension between the control and protection aims. Guaranteeing this right has been presented as a solution for forced internal displacement. Nevertheless, a more detailed analysis could produce some doubts about its role in the well-being of those who have been uprooted. As we all know, forced internal displacement only became an issue meriting the extension of international community by the end of the 20th century. Before that, refugees were the only forced migrants to have their own legal classification and status in international law. The refugee category was created by the League of Nations after the First World War, aiming to protect specific population groups who sought a new home in Europe after being forced to abandon their countries of origin due to armed conflicts and revolution. This category was broadened and consolidated over the second half of the 20th century, this time under the mandate of the United Nations. However, the three essential premises that underline the first definition remained. The first of these premises is the international protection accorded to those whose civil and political rights have been violated and who cross an international border. Such people do not have the protection of their state of origin, which by act or omission is responsible for the circumstances that cause them to flee. The second is the concern for the stability and security of the host countries, which sees refugees as a vulnerable foreign population that could compete with the local population for access to scarce resources, leading to disorders that could eventually breach international borders and affect the whole region. The third premise is the recognition of the international nature of the issue of refugees, given that this involves the whole international community and not just individual states. These premises reveal a tension between the aim of controlling mass migration flows and of protecting the fleeing people. Since their inception as legal category, refugees have had a dual nature, both as a menace to the stability of states and even to international security, as well as vulnerable human beings, deserving international protection. International refugee law, designed to deal with this contradiction, has faced several transformations throughout time in the pursuit of a formula to balance control and protection. A formula that would be able to fulfill states' concerns about their own security and stability, as well as the demands for human dignity. By the end of the 70s, the existing system for providing assistance and protection to refugees faced a massive crisis. The number of people abandoning their countries in search of international protection was increasing rapidly, while state contributions to guarantee their care were decreasing at an even faster rate. In fact, according to the UNHCR, in the 1980s, $60 were assigned to each refugee, but this amount dropped to 38 by 1989. To address this situation, various initiatives were developed to encourage refugees to stay within their countries of origin. One of the first initiatives presented to the then Human Rights Commission by Sadruddin El Aga Khan in 1980 considered the protection and assistance provided to refugees as a powerful pull factor, as victims of war or mass human rights violations could be tempted to cross international borders in search of security and relief. In consequence, the proposal was to move the relief inside the country of origin, attending to the people before they could become refugees. Despite recognizing that most of this population would be internally displaced persons, this initiative did not address the root causes of the plight. Contention of the exodus and assistance to cover IDPs' bare necessities were their main aims. While this first proposal was not implemented, it did raise awareness of the need for the international community to provide support to displaced groups from within their countries of origin in order to avoid flows of refugees across borders. In the 1990s, these proposals were revisited, but this time accompanied by a robust dialogue on the need to guarantee the human rights of internally displaced people. Consider the most vulnerable victims in any situation of armed conflict or generalized violence. The fact that the system of refugee care had failed to achieve durable solution for those who had crossed international borders constituted a further argument in favor of the new proposals for action. The result of this was the formulation of the previously mentioned guiding principles. This legal instrument contains a strong tension between control and protection as a result of its twin objectives of containing displacement within states and guaranteeing the human rights of those fleeing. Even though protection is ostensibly a fundamental objective of the guiding principles, it is clear that the support model for international displaced people based on this legal instrument has three features that make this difficult to achieve. Firstly, the fundamental responsibility for guaranteeing the rights of these people lies with those states who were not able or willing to protect them in the first place. The role assigned to the international community is completely accessory, and its scope to act to protect displaced people is very limited. Secondly, it replicates the long-term solutions model of the refugee care system, despite the evident difficulty of this model in overcoming the vulnerability of displaced people. Finally, it inhibits exploration of the deeper causes of displacement by placing the violation of the right not to be arbitrarily displaced as the center of the problem. This right, strongly defended by the creators of the guiding principles, simplifies the phenomenon in question by treating the lack of protection of displaced people as essentially an issue of spatial mobility. This right deserves to be considered in more detail, as it plays a central role in the IDPs protection model proposed by the guiding principles, which guarantees full enjoyment to all human rights for which it is necessary that people are able to remain peacefully in their habitual places of residence. As a consequence, the victims who face the violation of this particular right found themselves helpless, mired in an extremely vulnerable situation. Their plight triggers the state liability, requiring a quick and efficient response in order to restore their homes to them. In case the state is unable to provide such protection, the international community can and should offer its collaboration by providing relief to IDPs to enable them to return to their places of origin, in a least desirable scenario, find a durable solution through local integration or resettlement. The right not to be arbitrarily displaced seems to be extremely useful for the aim of controlling transnational mass flows, as both states and international community endeavors are focused on bringing back uprooted people to the physical place where they used to be. But is the right not to be arbitrarily displaced equally useful for the protection aim? Probably not, as internal displacement is not just an spatial mobility issue, and by focusing on it, a thick veil is thrown over the root causes of the displacement. And here, we are not just talking about massive human rights violations, but economic, social, and cultural dynamics that need to be brought to light if we really want to protect IDPs. Moreover, returning IDPs to their homes is not enough to repair the deep damage caused to their lives as individuals and as community members. Everyone who works on forced migration issue is well aware of that, but we still rely on a legal instrument that does not. Perhaps the time to rethink this legal framework has come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. And if anyone wants to make a comment or questions, I just put one that we can pick up later. Please join us in the Zoom chat and we will discuss, we will have enough time to discuss after all the presentations. So why don't we go directly to the next presentation, our second speaker. It's the doctora Clara Inés Atehortúa Arredondo from the Universidad de Antioquia in Colombia. And her paper is, name is, title is Law Blind Side: The Inability of the Legal System to Understand and Attend to the Complex Nature of International Displacement. So please, Clara, start, and we're gonna put some comments in the chat Zoom box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leticia. Internal forced displacement has become a mainly legal situation. Generally, state recognition of the phenomenon is through juridical instruments. From this, multiple regulations have arisen to establish the jurisdiction of the entities and to determine and restore the violation of rights suffered by IDPs. Through this, IDPs' recognition and the possibilities of the restoration of their rights are demarcated by normativity. Any legal process implies a typification, through which a reality is classified or organized in classes. This implies that the elements that are considered secondary to the law are overlooked. In the case of forced displacement, legal provision in principle seeks the special warranty of rights, serves as a framework to circumscribe actions for those who are considered beneficiaries of the policy, and establish the scope of the action of the state, which is to prevent, assist, and end a displacement situation. To date, one of the biggest criticisms of the structural legal typification is that it has been used as an exclusion strategy to prevent some people having access to exceptional state protection. However, this is not the only side effect of this legal classification. In the following, I will describe two further results. Specifically, the legal constraints reflect the complexity of forced displacement and the way in which facilitate a high degree of discretion of the part of the public servant affecting the daily life of IDPs. Regarding the legal constraint, the first of these is linked to what has been defined as the effective cause of internal forced displacement. In Colombia, the existence of internal forced displacement is attached to internal armed conflict. Beyond the controversies about the elimination of other causes found internationally, such as natural disaster or mega project, there are relevant circumstances in the Colombian context that have not been included in the discussion about preventing, assisting, and protecting IDPs. Some of these causes have been pushing into the background. Discussion of issues such as the consequences of rural development, vision on inhabitants of the countryside, and the increase in expansive and extractive activities promoted by the state in order to achieve more international investment has not included analysis of the configuration and continuity of internal displacement. Likewise, consideration about rural property and barriers to the small farmers' access to land have been disregarded. Moreover, the role of some important economic actors, including miners, in destabilizing their traditional way of life of rural dwellers, and how this have forced people to abandon their homes has not been considered. Isolating these multiple causes that contribute to forced displacement has enabled the government to incorporate only some relevant issues when addressing displacement in order to make the task more manageable. One aspect in which this problem has been manifested is in prevention programs. The state strategy to prevent this phenomenon has focused on the fight against illegal armed actors, specifically against the guerrilla, who were identified in official data as the biggest driver of force displacement. Accordingly, an important strategy to prevent the phenomenon has been military build-up. Although there have been other actions, such as the implementation of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, as a complement to armed action. All the above affects other action in overcoming the displacement situation, such as the implementation of a return compact. The lack of guarantee to IDPs that they will have a secure livelihood in the rural areas to which they return, and the continuous armed confrontation among illegal and legal actors, to mention just some situations, have been cited by IDPs as harmless to their return. Thus, the return of IDPs has become an issue of rhetoric rather than an objective accomplished. Another aspect of legal recognition are the practices involved in the normative application. The function of the entities in charge of the system to assist IDPs, including defining the scope of the legal measure and action taken on behalf of IDPs. Given this, it is clear that the concepts and tools that serve as a framework for the care of the population and the restoration of the rights can be expanded or restricted at official discretion. IDPs have been shaped to become policy beneficiaries. Those responsible for the implementation of this policy give features to the subject of law, defining the characteristics that are considered essential to be the subject of special protection. Two of these characteristics are the situation of vulnerability associated with economic criteria and the idea of rooting. The consideration of whether the person matched with the official considered to be an IDP can slow the registration and affect the access to state assistance. This has been the case with the recognition of victims of forced intra-urban displacement. This displacement occurred from one neighborhood to another of the city, as well as in the context of armed conflict. In the initial discussion about forced intra-urban displacement, officials argued that the situation of those affected was very different from that other people coming from other places, as they had no phases of rooting. Therefore, they could not be characterized as IDPs, or at least not a priority to be registered by the care system. It has also been considered that IDPs do not belong to the city. It has been understood that they do not have the skills and knowledge to live in the urban space, and as a result, much of the official effort is aimed to raising awareness of the need to return to the places to which they belong. As said by one public servant, the community must perceive the land as its choice of life, a project capable of satisfying its basic economic requirements. Moreover, IDPs have been seen as insiders of urban disorder. In this way, local policies prioritize the function of the containing the possible disturbance that may arise from the exercise of the activities of these people in the city. One of the consequences of this reclassification is the redirection of the state intervention from protecting IDPs to restricting their activities in the city. Amid this framing exercise of the general regulation, the previously veiled conception of the access of IDPs to the city emerged. This responsibility for this deepened the gap in the guarantee of rights and clearly removed the possibility of a lasting solution of the situation of IDPs. This, at the same time, prolongs a situation that has already lasted for a long time for many of those who have been displaced from their homes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clara. And I'm reading some questions over here, so please feel free to put all the questions that you would like to ask or comments to Clara, and we will have enough time to share some ideas. So now the last panelist, the last speaker, but not the last in this presentation. So I would like to present you Ramon Martinez Coria in this panel. He's from the Foro para el Desarrollo Sustentable, Forum for the Sustainable Development in Mexico. And he will present his paper, The Maya Train Project, or How the Trigger Operating Process in Aim of Sustainable Development and Green Tourism. This is a really challenge presentation, even for those who are following these kind of issues. And I would like to hear and even question Ramon in our box, and then discuss in open presentation also. Thank you, Ramon, and please join us.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. The Mayan Train, a mega project promoted by the Mexican federal government, is best seen inside the geopolitical framework of the Great Caribbean Basin. There is a strong pressure on the underfunded public policies and the fragile commons by transnational capital and consortia stealing energy and natural resources, acquiring land for agro-industry and mining, building high-impact tourism clusters with linked regional Mayan communities and their ancient way of life are seriously threatened with dispossession, forced displacement, and involuntary resettlement. We want to focus on the non-internal factors creating these conditions, meaning, for example, worrisome changes, the rule of law and due process, open doors for private investment, eroding Mayan biocultural heritage, territories, and patrimony. Maya Train is, in fact, represents the epicenter of the regional land use reconfiguration, extending beyond the Yucatan Peninsula, connecting directly with the parallel trans rehabilitated in Tehuantepec. Government strategy has become a series of repressive impositions, violating collective human rights of all those communities resisting official policy and contractors' actions. The first step toward legitimizing this project involved falsifying communities' legal consent without the obligatory consultation process. Now, several forced displacements and involuntary resettlements are underway along the railroad right-of-way facilitated by the United Nations Habitat Agency, policy planning on behalf of the National Tourism Development Fund, and it cannot be accepted. So I will talk about the indicators of the social impact due to the construction and medium-term effects of the Mayan Train. In the first hand, we have, in the case of the population, the negative impacts occur in terms of pauperization of the owners of the land, factionalism within the communities, assemblies, and among the affected or at-risk communities, it modes in particular of the agro-silvo-pastoral uses, loss or inaccessibility to their sacred places, imposed adaptation to new productive chains, and the consequent stratification that opens the gap of inequality, destruction of roads that enable the system of local exchange, sudden changes in the relation of the local and regional power will, with the arrival of new political and economic and of traditional agricultural activities by the confinement of the railway, the consequent loss of biocultural heritage of Mayan communities is the spearhead of the radical process of territorial reordering according to the interest of private capital over the commons, which primarily affects the cultural symbolic relationship between territory, cosmovision, and society, as well as their model of housing, residence, and dispersed settlement patterns. It is a type of multidimensional impact that is not even glimpsed in economic calculation, with a reversible damage to the biocultural diversity of the Mayan peoples. This process, making community, its concept of sacredness of existence, signs it dislocate its strategy of multiple use of their habitat, where the milpa, the orchard, the mountain, and the jungle are combined in a chain of life, where agricultural, artisanal forms, hunting, fishing, beekeeping, and forestry are rotated. It is a factor of destruction of its entire biocultural enclave. The imposition of the project without the political participation of the landowners already possess a violation of the rights of the Mayan communities to decide on their own development priorities. Their procedural right to be consulted generates irreparable community disorganization and leads to the loss and looting of traditional knowledge. At the center of this type of productive displacement are the beekeeping and the agroforestry activities of the Mayan milpa. The most sensitive activity is the beekeeping with native Melipona bees due to the immediate contamination of their organic product and production process, which is a disaster for the socio-economic reproduction of the communities. In the medium term, this will become a serious factor in the disintegration of the communities themselves, which leads to the abandonment of local agriculture as well as opening up this mega-diverse territory to the extractive economy. The most relevant long-term threats involve large-scale deforestation and reforestation with agro-industrial monocultures, the management of so-called biological corridors of private control, as well as the folklorization and commodification of Mayan biocultural forms. It is serious that official rhetoric identifies the traditional Mayan communities as backward in justifying their productive displacement. The productive displacement towards activities associated with communities, tourism services like lodging, food, and recreation, which can lead to situations of conflict due to the dispossession. We are faced with the imposition of a highly predatory model of mass tourism based on an economicist vision that implies a serious marginalization and exclusion of the local population in the decision-making and of the supposed benefits. Its integration into the third sector, large-scale and northeastern region of the peninsula in the Ribera Maya, where is located Cancun, which is an unsustainable homogenizing economic model and opens the way to the development of the energy industry, agro-industrial, and biotechnology models of private control of the territory. The expansion of the tourist market on a large scale becomes the most aggressive strategy for territorial and biocultural dispossession, imposing a development model that monetizes and commodifies the cultural life of the traditional Mayan and peasant communities, their collective memory, their knowledge and traditional productive models. It is the imposition of a neo-colonial cultural model that threatens the existence of the communities themselves, because it implants economic enclaves that drastically transform the vernacular landscape, generates segregation and subordination of the local population, and degrades labor relations. The imposition of the mass tourism model imposes relations of servitude and threatens the dignity and the integrity of the individuals and communities, leading to the systematic violation of human rights. It promotes an illegal economy associated with prostitution and human trafficking, drug trafficking, and organized criminal violence for money laundering and the control of places with a very high social costs. The train project will trigger a urban and demographic growth that leads to an increase in criminal activities and violates local and regional security, which leads to the militarization of the territory in the short term to guarantee the private use of the commons. This is the same, in this sense, the territorial reordering involved is managed according to energy and commercial flows, not in the public interest. In this chain, and conditioned by private financial instruments, which disqualify community and civil society initiatives to causing or containing mass tourism. These conditions and corrupt the counter action of the Mexican state, thus forming a whole network of disposition of the national form of local intervention, which offers private investors labor, physical and environmental immunity. Segmentation and separation of the population centers by the confinement of the railway, which produce a high negative impact on the internal cooperation and exchange relations of the communities, therefore, the mobilization against the project. The territory reordering, the territorial reordering that triggers the Mayan train project also implies a fragmentation of the territory, both at a macro-regional scale, at the level of local community also. On the one hand, the installation of large infrastructure based on macroeconomic interests configures a new migratory border and funds the creation of free zones or their expansion, which are already territories with their own rules, right in the northeast region of the peninsula that action to the global economy. New territories are thus created that are excluded by the requirements for the operation of the tourist model that is being promoted, as is the case with the announcement of the creation of new fully planned population centers which will become containers for the displaced local population and the migrant population that will arrive in large numbers. In this sense, the supposed territorial reordering for sustainable use of the territory is a media fallacy with serious political conflicts, which is rather a first link in the transfer of national sovereignty. On the community scale of the traditional Maya and peasant population, it becomes a serious factor of community disintegration and objectification, of their common territorial heritage, which has a very high cultural, linguistic, and archaeological and historical impact. Segment community territories, segregate sacred places, cemeteries, and domestic and collective strong impact on the spiritual and material life of the Mayan people. It is a disintegrating factor for community, sociocultural formation, and for the development of settlement residents. But Leti, can you tell me if I have a few minutes more?
Yes, you can follow. Continue, Ramon.
Well, the productive displacement. Thank you very much. Productive displacement of groups of local transporters is a fact that implies a very high impact of these local groups that have a great political and economic power without considering safety with the large companies to mitigate this risk. Factor is essential to consultation and management of alternative productive means. It implies the implementation of consultative and consultation process, which mitigate the tendency to interpose community resistance movements and amparo lawsuits. I don't know if you, if I can tell you the meaning of this kind of lawsuits, considering public and private investment with human rights standards to reverse indicators of poverty and marginalization and compensation in the negotiations, considering that the owners of the land can become investment partners, but it is not the manner to keep going this project. There is a clear government intervention in the community assemblies to force the cession of land rights of all communities on the train routes, with an explicit intention to divide and confront them internally. The agrarian assemblies have not been consulted for their consent to the allocation of their land or for the sake of the project, which is have entered into severe internal conflicts over the choice of parceling and selling land or accepting changes in the land use, a strategy of cession of the territory to the exploitation of external private agents out the tropical forest. The public consultation has actually aimed at quelling the voices of the landowners and the resistance to the model being implemented. The assemblies have not manifested themselves legally, but within the agrarian courts that have been corrupted. All this promotes a new stage of land grab and restoration of land latifundios, we say, when the owner of Holland is a legalized operating in indigenism. The lack of the knowledge about the alienation of lands due to the displacement of poverty to the trust that will be imposed for the phasing of the new population centers is serious, in addition to the contracts and private agreements already signed and tenders already granted without the consent of the owners of the land. False consensus have been managed without prior information. Corporate mafias recruit corrupt community leaders and threaten the unacute.
Bueno, ¿me están escuchando?
I think we have lost Ramon.
Okay, well then we will wait for Ramon, but in that case, I suggest that we can continue. We have a lot of questions and comments, and I think we have enough time for let us panelists to respond or just react to make a kind of dialogue with those who are following. And then if Ramon comes again, we can finish his presentation. And so in that case, I suggest I'm not going to read the questions because everybody can see it. So each one of the panelists, please react about what you think about the questions or those things that you think is much more important to, not to answer, but generate this kind of dialogue. Beatriz, please, can you start discussing those things that you see much more, not much more interesting, but focusing in those things that you are presenting here, please?
Okay, thank you, Leticia. And I apologize because I'm going to close my camera because there is a delay between the image and the sound, and I think that it can be distracting. So I think that I'm going to respond some questions that have more or less the same theme, and after Clara's responses, I'm going to go through other kind of questions that touch different issues, because all of them are just really interesting. So regarding the first question, the one that asked me to make a balance regarding the application of the guiding principles, I think that the balance is positive, but not positive enough. I mean, I can't deny the importance of the guiding principles. First of all, because they have put a name on the internal displacement phenomenon. And as everybody knows, what does not have any name simply doesn't exist. So I think that is a very relevant merit of the guiding principles, having put a name to this phenomenon, and also to awake the awareness of the international community and even the states where this phenomenon is happening about the importance to take care of this particular population that is extremely vulnerable. Then I think that also is very important regarding the guiding principles, the fact that they propose to the states creating an statute, including a very relevant bunch of human rights, especially addressed to IDPs. I think that is extremely valuable. However, I insist, they focus too much on the spatial mobility. Internal displacement is much more than that. And prevention really doesn't have a place in this legal instrument. And I think that it doesn't because despite all that has been said, all that has been written, the guiding principles inherit the concept of displaced person from the refugee law. And as we all know, refugee law, if we go to the inception of the refugee law, we will find that one of the main agreements made among the states to create this new regime back then in the 50s was to throw a thick veil over the root causes. So it works for refugees, because otherwise probably the states won't be willing to accept the 1951 convention. But in the case of the internal displacement, this assumption is tragic, because it doesn't let us to go further and to act over these causes. And that is my response to the first question. As I see that Ramon is here again. Ramon, do you want to finish your presentation?
Ramon, are you there?
I am very sorry. I was lost for a few minutes, but I am back. Well, just to say 2 points more. Affectation of land. The affectation of lands of common use, which has a high impact on the assembly consensuses, which generates a great risk of internal social conflict due to the transfer of agrarian rights. And the other question is, at the end, the real estate speculation and purchase of plots and urban lands in the agrarian nuclei for predatory services. So we have much more to say, but we can do our best to answer the questions of the participants. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Don't worry, Ramon. Maybe you can see the questions and in the chat. So later on you can respond, okay? So, well, Beatriz, do you like to continue what you were discussing?
Okay, thank you, Leti. Yes, the second question that I found really interesting was the question regarding the current use of the guiding principles. And I'm going to link this answer to the previously one, because I really think that they have some really important, they have made some really important contributions to the protection of internally displaced persons. But I think that nowadays we have to take them with a grain of salt. I mean, we cannot forget the control aim. When the guiding principles were, during the first stages of the guiding principles as a legal international instrument, there were some discussion regarding this dual nature, these twin objectives between protecting and control. But through the pass of time, this discussion was just forgotten. And I think that that's a really big mistake, because when the guiding principles became to be a well-known instrument, and not only the states, but the activists and the academics start to knowing them and loving them, because there was like, yeah, finally there is some legal instrument that talks about internal displacement. It was very easy to forget that this is not only something for protecting human rights, but also something to control international borders. So I think that that is important to talk about the guiding principles, remembering that there is some kind of contradiction inside this legal instrument. And finally, because I want to give the floor both to Clara and to Ramon, regarding the Colombian IDP policy, there is a very complex and interesting question regarding how Colombia has managed both the IDP, the millions, 9 million IDPs, and the 2 million of refugees from Venezuela. And I think that the case of Colombia is perfect to illustrate the problems, the issues of the guiding principles, because Colombian public policy on IDPs is great and is very sophisticated and has been proved enormously successful to provide assistance and protection to those who have been uprooted. But this success is only focused on this stage where the forced displacement has taken place and before achieving durable solutions. This policy has had several problems implementing preventing tools. And despite all the efforts, all the resources, it has also had enormous problems, huge problems regarding durable solutions. Thus, I think that Colombia has been a very disciplined student from the guiding principles, and its problems facing this issue also reveals the guiding principle issues. And that's for me now. I'm giving the floor to Clara.
Please, Clara, if you want to, see the questions and also comment what you would like to say.
Okay, I have a direct question. It's about the perspective from the mayors about IDPs.
Put your video, Clara, please.
Yes, I try to. It's okay? Okay. Thank you. I have problems with internet today and I don't know how it's working that. Thank you. And part of one of them question is about the position or perspective of the mayors about IDPs. And we have an issue in that because part of the struggle of IDPs in the cities is about how the mayors are dealing with the local integration, because we had a lot of contradiction about policies and actions. On one hand, we have special policies to protect IDPs linked to the Constitutional Court decision about the protection of IDPs. And in this order, they try to develop policies about protect IDPs in the cities. But when you close to this policies, do you notice that it's just an assistant policies? It's not about local integration or resettlement in the cities. And that's why, in the other hand, most of the policies included even in the development local plans is just about how people can be registered and how they can get information about the system. But when you ask for the politics about local integration, the situation is the opposite. We don't have, for example, in the case of housing, most of the mayors have said they don't have the budget of the resources to guarantee a proper house, how provide urban facilities to the IDPs. And a similar situation happens with the job policies. The mayor have thought there is not their total responsibility, and in consequences, IDPs have been forced to remain in the outskirts in the cities with precarious jobs. And that's why, as Beatriz said, we don't have a durable solution for IDPs right now, in my opinion. About other question about the attention to asylum seekers from Venezuela, in my opinion, it was a really difficult situation for us because it is really odd because the migration route had been the opposite from Colombia to Venezuela. And that is a challenge for us because it's the first time, at least at the first time formally, we receive asylum seekers. And this situation shows several problems with our policies. One of them is Colombia is not really welcome to migration, and that is part of our story. And the other issue involving there maybe is the lack of the attention, the IDPs attention system, and part of the depth we have with IDPs is just related to asylum seeker right now, I think. Third is again about the durable solution for migration. We don't have, despite the experience about internal migration, we don't have a real policies about the durable solution for IDPs and asylum seekers, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Well, there's I think enough time, Ramon, also for react to the questions, to the comments, and also if Beatriz or Clara would like to add something, because I think this gonna give a lot of information to, not information, a lot of issues that we can discuss for the next presentation of this what Beatriz are putting here as something to challenge the law as we are seeing now in terms of displacement. So please, Ramon, could you start reacting as you would like?
Thank you, Leti. Well, about the wider drivers of the displacement, we need, I think we need new international rules to stop the transnational corporations or to control them, meaning something like a business and human rights rules, because the transnational companies are not respecting these human rights principles. So we have much more to do about the transformation in the human rights principles in the international scale. And we have to link the government responsibilities with the transnational interests, wider drivers of displacements. But we have another kind of problems. We have to have a reflection deeper about the international crime organizations, because this kind of projects of high impact economical interests are going everywhere. Maybe not everyone knows that in Mexico we had the past century the social property of land. Then the international pressure for economic transformation become to introduce in Mexico the private property of lands rules. So it is not only this kind of mega projects, but we have to face the corruption of the government, the powerful interests of these mega actors, economic actors, and there are no specific rules to save the indigenous communities from these risks. So it is not only the train, it is the whole thing is surrounding the train. The speculation of the lands is the first point here. So, for example, this train will provide with oil the Caribbean side of the country and selling oil to the Caribbean basin. So there are another interests hidden by the train, and we have to clear this kind of planning. So just at the beginning to be really honest. Our governments are not using the truth to concert the collective will. I don't know if I am answering those two questions, but that's.
No, Ramon, I think it's interesting what the things that you are presenting, that sometimes if you are not Mexican, you don't know, and it's important to put it on. So now, Beatriz and Clara, I don't know if you have something else that you would like to add, or at the same time, even asking to those who are following us. Because not just to make a dialogue in other way, just to pick up those ideas that it's going to be very, very important to us to discuss later on as a LANID, no?
Yes, in fact, we really want to thank you for your wonderful questions, because as Leticia have just said, they are going to be very helpful for us in our discussions. Just thinking about that, thank you for the question regarding the relevance or irrelevance of the refugee and IDP definitions, categories, because this example that has been put in place in this question regarding the question of the borders that some groups say that are international borders, and other groups say that that's not an international border, that is an internal border, is just one of the issues that we have been discussing through the last months. What's that importance of the international borders? Why a person who is fleeing for something becomes something completely different just because he or she crossed an international border? And that's something that particularly interests to Leticia, isn't it, Leti? Yes, because I must confess, I don't have an answer to this question, because it's something that we have been delving into. And I don't know if, Leticia, you want to say something about this?
No, just it's an idea that we haven't discussed a lot, because sometimes we are, at least in Latin America, what we are seeing is how this displacement we call internal displacement, but at the end it's international or both at the same time. So we have to, or at least is this what we are discussing, we should change the way that we are discussing this displacement, because we don't find the answers around the problems that the people express and present, much more in terms of the legal status that people follow or can have at the end of the place where they finally they can stay. Well, so maybe this is one of the things that in other places, in other countries are discussing also, why we can continue saying that the border is just international or internal in terms to those who are fleeing from the violence or even from economical precarity. So, well, it's something that we are discussing in our in LANID. I don't know if you have another idea that we can put in over here, or at the end, start thinking these ideas that those who are following us now are putting over here, and we are really thank you. We thanks your comments and your questions, and maybe Clara, Ramon, Beatriz, or finally we can close over here. What do you say? Well, if you have any other questions, just say, let me see, or
I have another answer, sorry, regarding the
Just
question. Oh, sorry.
please.
Yes, regarding the question of the control objective, this person who wonders if the reference to the migration control objective of the guiding principles is going to become more evident in the foreseeable future. I really don't know. I think that despite, I know that this is something that can arise some criticism, I think that the control objective has been present since the beginning, since the inception of the protection model. Perhaps not very successfully always, but I think that one of the problems of this model is that we start paying less attention to this objective, forgetting that is there. And regarding the future, I won't be surprised if one strategy to achieve more attention and resources to IDPs would be saying that if you attend IDPs, you won't have more refugees. So I won't be surprised if this issue arises more often in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, no, it's very important to say and follow this situation that could happen. Well, so I think it's enough for now. We have a lot of things to discuss. It's a little bit difficult for us to discuss in other language, but at the end, I think we make our best. And finally, well, we're gonna be in contact. Of course, we are invited, all of us, to follow the next panel. And please, let's keep in contact. So thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists, by David. And okay, the next plenary, Professor James Hathaway, and we have the Zoom in the program. So let's do it, and let's see each other in the next panel. Thank you so much, and see you later. Here from Mexico, and there from Colombia, from Spain, and from Sonora, Mexico. Thank you so much.